Good morning, good evening, from wherever you are throughout the world. Hello. My name is Talon Rindels, and I am a senior admissions consultant at the MBA Exchange. What's the MBA Exchange, you might ask? We are a full-service admissions consulting company that focuses on the graduate level. So primarily MBA, but also MPP, MPA, dual degrees, you name it, we probably do it. And we do everything from, test prep to mock interviews to waitlist management. Really, we are there by your side, regardless of what stage that you're at in your admissions journey. You can find us at www.mbaexchange.com. So as an admissions consultant, we have talked to thousands and thousands of candidates out there. And the number one thing that we hear from candidates is, I need help with my story. So if you are one of those people out there saying, hey, I've been sitting here staring at a blank screen for the last 3 hours and I can't think of anything to write. Or if you're saying, in my last 25 to 30 years, I have done so much. How can I possibly begin to boil it down into this 300-word limit essay? Or, maybe you're someone saying, I've already written my essays, but they're 2 times the word limit. If any of this rings true to you, you are in the right place, because here today we are ready to talk about what is your story and help you to find it. So over the next 30 minutes, we will dive into, what your story is and why it matters, what good and not so good looks like. So what is your story and what isn't your story? And then give you some tips and tricks for how to find your unique story. And I know we've only got, 4 or 5 weeks maybe left before round 2 deadlines. The tools that we will provide are things that you can actually implement in these next few weeks if you are a round 2 candidate for this year. So let's first start with what is not your story. So what we see here are 3 key credentials for John Doe. We've got his resume, we've got his high school transcript, and we've got his GMAT. Now, these things are interesting, but they're not the full story for John Doe, right? So big X marks here. These are not your story, because imagine what it would be like trying to assess what it would be like to work with John Doe based just on these 3 things. You'd probably have no idea how he would really show up on a day-to-day basis, because you know what he did, but we don't have any idea why he did it. And we really don't know who he is as a person. Why does knowing someone as a person really, really matter? It's because, we care about people. We as people care about people. Probably not a surprise, right? And we like to invest in people. And what you see on the screen here, these 3 things, we don't see a person there, right? That's why your story is so important, because we want to see, our AdCom rather, wants to see the human behind the story. Imagine if we took John Doe's resume and we chopped it off halfway through. We probably wouldn't really care all that much, right? We'd still have an idea of some of the things that he did, and, we wouldn't even know that we're really missing anything, probably. But imagine if you're reading a story and all of a sudden it ends halfway through. You would be so curious to see how it ends and learn more. I want you to think of your MBA admissions journey in the same way. Your MBA application should be the beginning of the story, but it should tell just enough to get AdCom hooked, but then have a couple of things in there that you kind of hold back that leave them eager to learn more and inviting you to that interview. That's how I want you to think about your MBA application. All right, so now let's go into what is your story. So your story is a narrative. That's important, right? It's not bullets. It's not, just little snippets here and there. It's a narrative that articulates who you are, what you care about, where you've been, where you want to go, and when you want to go there. So that would be your short-term and long-term goal. And then how an MBA really fits into that. Sometimes candidates get the top 4 in really, really well, but then AdCom sits there going, But then why do you need an MBA? If you're so great and you're so perfect, why do you even need an MBA? So that piece of the story is extremely critical. Don't just assume AdCom knows why you're applying. Now, your story should also be authentically you and irreplicable by others. So when you read through your entire admissions campaign before you hit that submit button, and if somebody else could have written those exact same things, you're not telling your own story. And you need to dig deeper. Now, your story doesn't have to include overcoming some large amount of adversity or discrimination or hardship. And it doesn't have to include changing the world, ending world hunger. Oftentimes, the things that are most seem really ordinary to you are truly extraordinary to others. And sometimes it takes talking to someone and sharing with them your story, or just talking about who you are and where you come from to even begin to identify those things that are ordinary to you, but extraordinary to others. For me, when I was applying to my MBA, I had no idea that the fact that I was a first generation undergrad student was important. If anything, I thought it was something I should hide. But that turned out to be a critical part of my admissions journey. Or the fact that my father started his own business out of the basement of our home, a taxidermy business at that. And so I grew up with all the smells that come along with this unique business that my dad created out of the basement of our home. And what I didn't realize is I learned so much from his journey. And I had no idea before I started on my MBA admissions journey that was important. Now, the where you want to go doesn't actually have to happen. Candidates get so hung up sometimes on, well, I don't know what I want to do with the rest of my life. That's actually why I'm going to get my MBA, is that I want to figure out what I want to do. AdCom knows that half of you are going to be there for that. But at the end of the day, in your admissions campaign, you need to have a concrete plan. So sure, that might change, but based on what you know today, here's how you would write your future story. That's really important. And the reason is because it proves to AdCom that you're self-aware enough to arrive on campus with a plan, make an impact while you're there, and actually land a job upon graduation. Those things are critical to AdCom. And honestly, there is so much that you can do while you're on campus. FOMO is a real thing, fear of missing out. And I've seen so many candidates and, even my fellow peers when I was an MBA student at Kellogg School of Management. And I saw so many people get involved in too much, spread themselves too thin, and it's because they did not arrive with a plan. And that is why when you write your MBA application and your essays and your interviews and the whole package, it's important that you share with AdCom what your long-term goals are. Be very clear and specific on what they are as well, because that way they know you will arrive with a plan and not fall subject to FOMO and get completely overwhelmed. Now, your story holds regardless of the questions that AdCom is asking. So your story is you. It's authentically you. It doesn't necessarily change depending on the questions. So in an interview, for example, if your interviewer says, hey, tell me about yourself, or walk me through your resume, John Doe, they're asking the same question. When you look at the essay sets, HBS, what more would you like us to know as we consider your candidacy for the HBS MBA? Or if you look at Stanford, what matters to you most and why Stanford? They're essentially asking you for the same. Now, what I don't want, though, is for you to get that confused and think that you can copy and paste the same essay from school to school. Absolutely not. So while the nature of your story will hold true, regardless of which school you are applying to, the way you share it will show up a bit differently, depending on the way the question is asked and depending on what that school values the most. So please, 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 no copying and pasting. Do not get me wrong when I say that your story holds true. It still may come to life slightly differently for every single school. All right. So what does good look like? Now, I already shared with you a bit about the contents. So that's the who you are, the what you care about in the world, the where you've been, the where you want to go and when, your short-term and long-term goal, that is. And then, of course, how an MBA fits into that. So that's the contents. Now, the feel, as I like to call it, is equally or maybe even more important. So let's walk through what's important about the field. It's a logical connection. So what I mean by that is your story should have a rhythm. It should have a flow to it. And each step must be tied together. I like to think about it as a geometry proof. If A, then B. If B, then C. If C, then D. You can't assume that AdCom is going to create that connection between different steps in your story. You have to help to create that connection for them. It should be memorable, which can come to life in different ways. It can be unique, it can be vivid, it can be emotional. So if you had some great experience where, you were walking to your first, maybe you walked on campus to visit one of their programs, talk about what it smelled like. Talk about how the weather was that day. You need to get to script and create a picture in AdCom's mind of that experience. So take them on that activity or that experience with them. Be specific. Now, this applies to all of your stories, but in particular, this also applies to your long-term and short-term goal. And now that means you can be as specific to even state the specific company that you would want to work for. I want to work for a large management consulting firm such as, and you have your pick. If you could write your story, what would it look like in your wildest dreams? That's how I would think about things. You should display conviction. Be confident in what you say. And we don't want to see, I hope, I dream. You want to say, I will, I intend. Because if you don't have confidence in yourself, how is AdCom supposed to have confidence in you? And also showcase humility and growth. So while you need to be confident, you also need to showcase kind of where you've stumbled along the way, where you've grown, and maybe the key areas where you still need to grow. Because if you had it all figured out, you wouldn't be here applying for an MBA after all. So now let's test how well you were listening. So here's a case study. Brenda, let's meet her. We've got her credentials. She has a psychology degree from UT Austin. She has a 3.8 college GPA, a 710 GMAT, 5 years in finance in the consumer products industry. She lives in Chicago. She's applying to HBS, and she has a 200-word limit for her story. Now, we all know HBS has 1,000, or, well, actually unlimited, right? But you want to keep it probably around 1,000. But let's just pretend, for this particular situation, she's got a 200-word limit for her story. Now, she starts out with 2 paragraphs, and I'll start with the first one here. I desire every family to have ready access to food to eat and clothes to wear. Growing up in a small rural community, we had to drive an hour to find a grocery store, and it was a real strain on my single working mother. At the same time, there's a landfill near my childhood home that grew 10 times in the last 2 years. Today, e-commerce improves the lives of people like my mother every single day. I know it is the future, and we must find a way to make it more environmentally friendly. Long term, I hope to be at the forefront of that by becoming a leader in the retail sector. In order to gain the broad strategic perspective I'll need to make smart, sustainable decisions post-MBA, I aspire to become an associate at a large management consulting firm. Okay, now pop quiz. Now I know this isn't interactive. Maybe you can take notes on your own. What is she missing when it comes to the contents? How did she do? So I think she did a pretty good job with who she is, right? She grew up in a small rural community. She has a single working mother, gives you a feel for kind of where she comes from, right? Now, what she cares about, this one is crystal clear. I desire every family to have ready access to food to eat and clothes to wear, and we must find a way to make e-commerce more environmentally friendly. And she talks about the when, right? She's got a long-term and a short-term goal. That's her post-MBA being short-term. But where she's really been, how an MBA fits into that, we don't see that here. Now let's see how she did on the field. On the field, I think she did a great job with the logical connection. There is an opportunity that I'll talk about in a moment, but, she provides the connection between her goal of her desire, for every family to have ready access to eat that came from when she was, a child, and it was a strain on her mom. She thinks that e-commerce improves, the lives of people like her mom. Again, ties it back to her mom, and that she wants to improve that. And what she needs to do that is broad strategic perspective, to make smart, sustainable decisions. So I think generally speaking, she's done a decent job of that logical connection. It's memorable, if you ask me. Could have been a little bit more memorable, right? We talked about smells and, colors and, what the weather was like and all of that, right? But I mean, she doesn't have a lot of words to work with. So generally speaking, I think she's created something that's a bit memorable. But we're kind of missing the mark on the final three. So with some quick changes, I think she could do so much better and without adding any additional words to this or without an increase to word count. So I do think she needed to create a connection between that landfill and e-commerce. So I added a short little blurb there. So the landfill, is filled with .com packaging and materials. And now what we've done also is made it more specific. We say she wants to be the head of e-commerce for a large retailer such as Walmart. And she wants to work at a company such as BCG, post MBA. We also changed the hope and aspire to have conviction. My long-term goal it's very definite, right? And then I intend to become an associate. But we still haven't quite hit the mark on humility and growth. So let's dive into that. To do so, Brenda has added another paragraph, which is, while I've gained some great analytical skills in my 5 years in CPG, as a liberal arts major, I know an MBA from HBS is critical to rounding out my finance experience with the more holistic general management perspective that I need. And here she's again displaying conviction. I know an MBA. So she really says that's what she needs. And humility and growth. Here she's shown that, hey, I've grown, I've gained some analytical skills, but then she also is, a bit humble, right? I'm a liberal arts major. I don't really have exactly what I need, to really think holistically about businesses. And so I want to round out that finance experience. So she's really showing, that she's grown and that she's got more growth to be had. So now with the addition of this last paragraph, let's see how we did with the contents. So if you remember, we were missing the where she's been and how an MBA fits into that. So with this paragraph, I'd say she covered it, right? She's saying in my 5 years in CPG. So she talks a little bit about some of her, history and where she's been, and then how an MBA fits into that. That one is crystal clear here, with those final 3 lines there. So what I want you to gather from this is that with just some slight tweaks and the addition of a few words here and there, you can accomplish so much in telling your story in a way that nails both the contents and the feel. Now, those really astute listeners out there, you were probably wondering, where was the why? Who, what, where, when, how, but where was the why? The why is extremely important. And to me, here's what the why is. It's why AdCom should pick you. And let's first talk about how not to communicate your why. What I don't want you to do is go writing your essays. Hey, AdCom, you should admit me into your program because I will work harder than anyone. I have the grit, I have the tenacity, and I have the dedication to excel. And here's why I don't want you to write this in your MBA applications, because ultimately you should show AdCom these things through your story. If you have to overtly spell it out and say that, then AdCom's going to wonder if it's really, really true. So with the way that you tell your story, it should give AdCom the confidence that you're going to work harder than anybody else. It should give them the confidence that you have the grit, the tenacity, and the dedication to excel. So you don't need to say it if you tell your story correct. Okay, so in summary, this can be, take a screenshot here, right? The contents and the feel, they are equally important. And as you can see, I have the why AdCom should pick you grayed out there, because ideally you don't want to say that over. So now you all are probably thinking, okay, well, that was a great example. I learned a little bit about Brenda, but how do I find my story? And if you ask me, ideally, you find your story even before you open up that application. But we probably have a lot of folks on the line here today that have round 2 deadlines in a couple of weeks on their radar, and they're going, oh my goodness, I already started. So am I completely screwed? No, you are not. Absolutely not. Do not panic if you've already opened it. I will give you some tips and tricks on this next slide for what you can do between now and round 2. Of course, if you are an eager beaver and you're talking about round 3, you're talking about next year applications or sometime in the future, these things absolutely still apply. And then I suppose you have the benefit of maybe not even opening up that application just yet. So first and foremost, let's take a step back, put the applications aside for a moment. Let's not think about them for a day or two and get a grasp on what you've done. Jot down your personal, your professional, your academic involvement for each life stage that you've been in. And I'm talking go back to when you were 4 years old or whenever your first memories began, because oftentimes what happened to you as a child is a really, really critical part of your story and who you've become today. Now reflect on why you engaged in those activities and how they're connected. What caused you to interrupt one thing to start a new thing? And then identify the times that you thrived and the times that you stumbled. And those times that you stumbled may even be more important, than the times that you really, really excelled, because those are your periods of growth. Now, we also need to get a good handle on what your goal is. Again, it can change once you go and, embark on your MBA, but for the purposes of the application and based on what you know today, let's get a really clear handle on what your long and short-term goal is. What I'd want you to ask yourself is, what do I want noted in my retirement speech? Picture yourself at that retirement dinner. What are the things that you want others saying about how wonderful you are? And those are the things that should really craft what your goal is. If you do that, you won't have to be reaching for the passion, to jump off the page as you're writing your essays, because it will truly be what you're passionate about and what really matters to you. Now, also, I want you then to go back to this step 1 and identify which past activities that you've had in your life, how those things really connect to that goal. And that will really end up instilling authenticity and believability into your goal. Oftentimes, if you say you want to do something but literally have no proof in your life that you care about it, that makes it really, really difficult to showcase that this is something that you're passionate about. So dig deep and find past activities that actually relate to what your long-term goal is. And now this third piece is critical. You must make sure that you have the right people in your corner for this process. And you want to get them in your corner before you're actually ready to hit that submit button, because these people need to plan to be a part of this process, plan to help you, rather than have a scramble, a day before the deadline. So what I encourage you to do is find people who accomplish these 3 things. Someone who knows the school and the admissions process, so that when they read through it, they say, oh yes, this feels like HBS. Oh yes, this feels like Stanford. You want someone who knows English grammar really, really well. This will make sure you don't have any typos or errors or spelling mistakes, but also can really help to ensure that you get within that word limit. And then somebody who knows you. And ideally, this would be someone going way, way back who knows you through and through, whether it's a family member, a friend. But when they read that application, I want them to see you for your own authentic self. Read it and say, yes, this feels like Brenda. Now, if you're considering using an admissions consultant, we can probably, or any admissions consultant should be able to accomplish points 1 and 2, knowing the admissions process, knowing the school, and knowing the English grammar really, really well. Now, if you pick the right consultant who really does their job well, by the end of it, they will know you as well and be able to read through that and ensure that they hear your voice and your stories. Even so, though, whether you work with an admissions consultant or not, I think it's still really important that that third piece is someone that you've known for years and years from your family or friends, to really make sure that it is you and your authentic self that jumps off the page. Now, I know what many of you are still thinking. You're thinking, but I truly don't have a unique story. Those are great tips, Talon, but I don't have a unique story. Now, I don't often like to tell people that they're wrong, but if this is you, I'm sorry, but I respectfully disagree with you. You are wrong. You just need to find your story. You've got to talk to people who will ask you the right questions, who will listen to the tone in your voice when you talk about certain experiences, to be able to pull out what those key important parts of your story really, really are. So I promise you, what seems ordinary to you is certainly extraordinary to somebody else. And so you need to have someone to help you to find that if you don't think you have one today. Now, if you want to chat with us later on, feel free to get in touch. We would love to meet you. You can find us at www.mbaexchange.com, or we can also find you on Zoom in a couple of minutes when we hop on. I'll hop on with my partner, Alex Min, where we can dive in and answer some of your specific questions that you might have. So please join